Operators, Thom Hartmann here with you. An Italian court convicted 23 CIA officers for kidnapping an Egyptian dissident on the streets of Milan, Italy, November 3rd, and sparking a global outcry against CIA extraordinary rendition tactics for terrorist suspects. None of the Americans was actually present at the trial that was held in Italy, as all of the suspects, all of these American CIA officers, had fled the country in advance of the investigation. The case arose after CIA officials kidnapped Egyptian expatriate Hassan Mustafa Osama Nasser, also known as Abu Omar, on the streets of Milan back in 2003 and transported him back to Egypt for interrogation and torture by Egyptian officials. Abu Omar had been a legal immigrant to Italy after fleeing religious persecution in Egypt. The 40-year-old was tortured so badly. Torture, he alleges, included electrical shock tortures and genital tortures that he emerged from Egyptian custody several years later, unable to walk without a cane and suffering from permanent incontinence. The CIA may have wanted to interrogate him because he attended a mosque reputed to include Al-Qaeda supporters. No one has ever charged this man with any crimes. Scott Horton is here with us, investigative reporter and an attorney specializing in international law and human rights, legal affairs contributor to Harper's Magazine, where he writes the blog No Comment. And Scott, you've written on this topic. You're familiar with this topic. I don't think most Americans even realize that 23 Americans were just found guilty of serious crimes in an Italian court this week.
Well, that's right. I mean, in fact, you've flipped through most of the media reports in the United States. They all seem to have, in the first couple of paragraphs, the statement of, well, it doesn't really matter because no one's ever going to do any jail time. They're just sort of brushing it off. And of course, also for the last year, almost 2 years, we've constantly heard press people saying, well, maybe there's some prospect that somewhere overseas there may be some prosecutions. And I would always listen to that saying, no, they're going on right now. In fact, The trial is midway, and we're likely to get convictions, which in fact happened.
So, and where are the people who are saying, well, let's bring back Roman Polanski right now? They're all in favor of extradition, and that's, I mean, obviously that's a whole other argument, and actually I think a case can be made for extraditing Roman Polanski, but isn't there a case to be made for extraditing these 23 CIA officers to Italy?
Well, of course, the United States acknowledges that they were doing its bidding, so the United States is not going to turn them over. But if you were to strictly enforce our bilateral agreement with the Italians, we would have to turn them over.
So the law requires us to do so.
Yeah, well, of course, on the Italian side, the Italian government also doesn't want this prosecution to go on. And the really interesting thing here is that Italy has completely independent prosecutors and completely independent courts.
Right. So this is not Berlusconi's idea. Berlusconi being a super right-winger, he's probably horrified by the whole thing.
Not only Berlusconi, but also Prodi, his sort of center-left predecessor. They both vehemently oppose this for the same reason, that is, this is going to embarrass the United States. The United States is our friend. Let's just stop it. But the Italian courts say that, embarrassment to politicians is not a reason not to enforce the law.
Yeah, what a novel notion, Scott Horton. By the way, Harpers.com for many of Scott's writings. Scott, what about the higher-ups? I mean, these guys were convicted. Here we have CIA officers who were convicted in an Italian court of kidnapping a man, extraditing is the wrong word, spiriting him off to Egypt, where he was tortured so badly that he's incontinent and has to walk with a cane. He's never been charged with any crime. I'm guessing this was part of the larger torture program that was being run out of the White House that was after the FBI was done interrogating people like Abu Zubaydah and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, after the FBI actually got useful information from them using traditional, normal, rational interrogation techniques, the things that work, the Bush administration desperately wanted them to say, oh, and by the way, Saddam Hussein is good buddies with Osama bin Laden. They're drinking buddies or whatever. And, of course, not the case. And so they used torture for the one thing that torture is actually good for, which is getting people to say what you want them to say, whether it's true or not, particularly when it's not true. What about the higher-ups? What about the possibility of the prosecution of Dick Cheney and Jay Bybee and John Yoo and George W. Bush and Don Rumsfeld? What about, and for that matter, I'm forgetting the name of the guy who was the former congressman who was the head of the CIA at the time, Porter Goss, thank you. What about them?
Well, you're asking exactly the right question, and moreover, that's what a lot of these CIA figures who got caught in this are asking. They're saying, why us? When we were just doing the bidding of senior people, why aren't they the focus?
Right.
Well, let's stop for a second and think. You know, the CIA and people like John Brennan have been vehemently opposing further investigations and disclosure of further facts about this renditions program. Well, this case in Italy explains to you very clearly what they are worried about. Right. They keep saying it'll undermine our relationship with foreign governments. No.
It exposes criminal behavior.
They're concerned about being prosecuted. And Armando Spataro, the prosecutor who brought this case, has made very clear he has been seeking information about the higher-ups in Washington who did this. He said, look, I took this case as far as the evidence would allow me to take it. I had very strong evidence of the involvement of these 26 people who were in Italy. Okay? And he's also said, and if I had information about the people who were running this show back in Washington, you better believe they would be added and prosecuted. And, you know, for instance, Stephen...
Scott? We just lost Scott. Okay. We will try to get him back, but Scott apparently has vanished. But this is, you know, there's an issue here that is even larger than the issue of why don't we prosecute the higher-ups, why don't we go against the higher-ups. Oddly enough, when we were engaged in war against Germany and Japan, there were times when we knew where Adolf Hitler was, and we didn't bomb him, we didn't take him out. There were times when we knew, well, throughout most of the war, we knew where the emperor lived, and where we knew where Tojo was. So, he's back on line 10 there? Okay. Scott, welcome back.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's quite all right. I was just raising a larger issue question here. I was saying during World War II, there were times when we knew where Hitler was, and we chose not to take him out. There was time we knew throughout the war where the emperor was, Hirohito, and many times when we knew where Tojo was, we didn't take him out. And one of the kind of unwritten or unspoken, or maybe it is written, rules of war is for the average working guy to get killed. It's not for the leaders to get killed. And it's like we protect the elite in wars, and it seems to me that this is an extension of that kind of thinking, and that kind of thinking, is really 15th century thinking, and it's time for us to set it aside.
Well, I think you're right to a certain extent. There has been this rule that goes back to, European ideas about how to conduct war, which is that we aristocrats and princes, all want to party and have a good time and go hunting during peacetime. We don't die. It's like the little peons who wind up dying in warfare. Right. That's sort of in the background here. And how does that express itself in international law? We have notions of immunity. And one of the bizarre things about this case is that, of course, it's Jeff Capelli who was the most senior person involved who directed this whole thing and who advocated it, who was given immunity in Italy. He was given immunity because he was because he had formal diplomatic immunity. He was credentialed as a diplomat in Rome, although everybody knows he was actually the CIA station chief. That was just a cover.
Right.
And Armando Spataro, I was on Amy Goodman's show with him yesterday morning, and he announced he is going to seek appeal the determination of immunity for the Rome station chief. He's going to continue to go after him.
Amazing. And we saw the same thing, by the way, in a series of presidential decisions, and I would argue that probably we could track them way back. Thomas Jefferson deciding not to go after John Adams for the Alien and Sedition Act, simply letting them expire on March 4th, the day that he was sworn into office, of 1800. But most recently, President Ford pardoning Nixon, and not just Nixon, but a whole bunch of his buddies, And then when there was evidence that the election of 1980 was corrupted by the Reagan campaign, perhaps negotiating with the Iranians to hold the hostages, they later sold Iran weapons when there were no hostages. And Reagan later admitted that he was giving weapons for hostages. What hostages? There were no hostages being held. Clinton decided not to investigate that.
And Lawrence Silberman, who is now a senior judge on the Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia, is the person who did all that.
Right. And so we still have this notion of it's kind of the antithesis of noblesse oblige, which the Kennedy family was really into. Of we're the nobility, we have an obligation to help everybody else. Now this is the noblesse immune or whatever. We have about 30 seconds left, Scott. I'd like you to talk about any ways that we can start to tear down that concept.
Well, I think the Italian court's helping us. I mean, they essentially have said Barack Obama wants us to look forward, not backwards, and they've said no way. We are dealing with these crimes. We're not going to forget them. It's too important. So this is a major breakthrough.
And we need to be doing the same thing in the United States with the Justice Department going after the last administration.
Absolutely.
Lying us into a war and then the criminal, I mean, the war, just the war profiteering in and of itself is so criminal. Scott Horton, harpers.org. You can find his writings over there. The attorney and author, Scott, you do absolutely brilliant work, and I am honored to have you on our show. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.